some people aren't actually rejecting God. They're rejecting the emotionally unhealthy person who spent their childhood impersonating him. Because before you ever understand theology, before you could study scripture or examine the life of Jesus for yourself, God already had a tone of voice. And for many of us, he sounded, a lot like our parents. If affection disappeared whenever you disappointed them, you may have learned that God's love was conditional. If questions were treated like rebellion, well, you may have learned that God was threatened by curiosity. And if every disagreement ended with, because God says so, you may have learned that faith meant surrendering your discernment. If forgiveness meant immediately giving harmful people access to you again, you may have learned that God cared more about keeping the family together than keeping you safe. If honor thy father and mother was used to silence you or shame you or demand unquestioned obedience, you may have learned that God was always on the side of whoever had the most authority. But I want you to listen really carefully. That may not have been God. That may have been control dressed up as conviction. That may have been emotional immaturity, borrowing divine authority. That may have been a dysfunctional family system putting God's signature on its own demands. And one of the holiest things that you may ever do is separate the true nature of God from the people who misrepresented him. Because Jesus said this, "He that hath seen me hath seen the Father." So look at Jesus. Jesus invited people, but he did not coerce them. He taught truth, but he never needed to control another person's response to it. He allowed people to misunderstand him. He let the rich young ruler walk away. He withdrew from crowds that felt entitled to his constant availability. He confronted religious leaders who used God's law to burden and shame and dominate people. He showed compassion without abandoning truth. And he forgave, but he did not entrust himself to everyone. And he loved people deeply without giving every person unlimited access to him. That is the foundation of Christ-like boundaries. We stop allowing emotionally unhealthy people to explain God to us, and we begin allowing Jesus Christ himself to reveal God to us. Because the true nature of God will never require you to call fear reverence. God will not require you to call control obedience, and he will not require you to call silence peace. He will not require you to call enabling forgiveness, and he will not require you to call unrestricted access reconciliation. You may need to grieve the version of God that you inherited. You may need to examine beliefs that once felt sacred, but were actually built around another person's fear, insecurity, or need for control, or their inability to tolerate your independence. And that examination is not necessarily a loss of faith. It may be the beginning of a more honest faith. You are allowed to re-meet God. You are allowed to ask whether the God that you fear actually resembles Jesus Christ. You are allowed to discover that God may be safer and kinder and wiser and more emotionally mature than the people who first told you about him. Maybe God was never the one trying to control you. Maybe God is the one trying to free you from the version of him that controlling people created. And that is why Christ-like boundaries matter. They are not about walking away from God. Sometimes boundaries are the first step or the first time you stop allowing emotionally unhealthy people to stand between you and him. Sometimes boundaries are the first time that you stop allowing emotionally unhealthy people to stand between you and him. But I don't know. There's a lot of people that think I'm crazy on this app. I'd love to know what you think down below in the comments.